Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 791st New Social Environment. I'm Carolyn, a Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring James Clar and Barbara Pollack. We are thrilled to welcome poet Farnaz Fatemi here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter, and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we're speaking from. And now to introduce today's guest and host. James Clar was born in Wisconsin to immigrant Filipino parents. His practice explores the narrative potential of light and technology and is motivated by personal experience and influenced by the city he lives in. His studio was based in Dubai for 6 years, New York for 15, and 2 years ago he moved to the Philippines. His work has been exhibited at museums and galleries globally. Barbara Pollack is co-founder and co-director of Art at a Time Like This, a platform for expression for artists and curators to respond to the most pressing issues of the 21st century. Her latest book, Brand New Art from China, A Generation on the Rise, is available from Bloomsbury Publishing. She's the recipient of 2 grants from the Asian Cultural Council and received a Creative Capital Andy Warhol Foundation Arts Writer Grant in 2008. Pollack teaches at SVA. Thank you all so much for joining today, and I'll turn it over to you, Barbara.
Hi, I'm Barbara. Hi, James. Hi, everybody in the audience. Thank you for joining us today. I am pretty much a newcomer to James's work, but was very interested when I was introduced to him by Silverlens Gallery. And I thought his works raised some very interesting questions. First of all, about what we anticipate seeing when we hear that an artist is from the Philippines or of Filipino descent, and what type, I've written on Asian art for quite a while and find that American audiences often bring certain stereotypes to viewing the work of artists from different locations in Asia. So I wanted to start off just with that with James. What do people expect when they come to see your work, and how do you play with those expectations?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think now that I'm Filipino American and then now living in the Philippines for the last 2 years, those kind of questions of identity have definitely started to play a central part of the work that I've been doing. I think when people say, Filipino artists, at least from my experience in the States or in the West, there's no real identity for it. At least growing up, there hasn't been as an artist or as even representation in popular culture or Western media. It's a very, as an Asian culture, it's completely underrepresented considering how many Filipinos there are everywhere in the globe. But it's just a really complicated, that's a complicated question, a complicated identity, even in the Philippines, just because of how diverse the population is and the culture is here, from the northern islands to the southern islands. It's 3,000 islands that were kind of clustered together as the Philippines through Spanish colonization. So, even before pre-colonial times, there wasn't really a central, there wasn't a central identity for them. They were just kind of placed together through colonization. And then, diaspora Filipinos growing up in the States, the thing that really kind of brings us together is just being another, just because we're not like other people, that just kind of binds us, but you wouldn't say you were from the North, the locals, or from the South, from Mindanao. We're not even getting into fine-grained details of what, Filipino identity is in the States. It's just that we're just from the Philippines.
Yeah, that's so interesting to me because I've written a lot about Chinese artists and Japanese artists and Korean artists, and they all feel that they bring a strong cultural identity, even if they were born in the United States, that there is a 5,000-year-old tradition that they're struggling with in presenting work in the West. And So that was an interesting conversation we had about that.
Yeah, for sure. Like Japan or Korea or China, it's really like monoculture, especially Japan, it's like, this is what Japanese people are for centuries. This is what the identity is. And you grow up with that, and you want to try to perpetuate that. Whereas in the Philippines, it's not like that. And even, it's even into like the cultural attitudes of the Philippines, even before Spain was there, is that it's just a trading route. It's a trading route where like a lot of different cultures had intermingled there, and they picked up different elements, and they've welcomed a lot of outsiders there. It's like really an opposite end of the spectrum as like Japanese people.
So do you feel that fluidity has impacted your work or your life experience, your approach to art making?
Yeah, it's definitely like made me understand a little bit more about like how things evolved here. And that is, I think like in the last 2 years, like with this show and the show before, I had one in 2021 at Silverlens here in Manila. And it's really like, since moving here, it's been really about like kind of exploring, just Philippine identity and trying to understand that, just because I didn't really know it growing up. I was born in Wisconsin, so it was like, the only Filipino within a 500-mile radius. Yeah. So, and then, I'm moving to New York, and then just living in different global cities. I think eventually the path just led me to eventually moving the studio to the Philippines.
And before we talk about that decision, I think it's important for the audience to see some of your work. So could you just begin walking us through your exhibition that's currently at Silverlens?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the exhibition is currently up. It's up for, I think, another 2 weeks. Closes at the end of the month on the 29th. And it's at Silverlens Gallery in New York, which is on, I think, 24th Street in Chelsea. So this is the outside of the gallery, as you'll see it. And then you can walk in. So the front room here has 2 works there. One is called The End, and then the other one is America, USA Flag. And, so I studied film at NYU, and then I got my graduate degree at ITP at NYU, which is Interactive Telecommunications program. And I shifted into kind of structural lighting and exploring more about like material use narratively and conceptually. So The End is like, it's like if you take like it's a light piece, and if you take like a high-speed shutter photo of the ending frame of a film, so you see the scan lines of a TV being formed. So it's kind of taking this last frame and slowing it down. So you're taking the end and then slowing it down, and you have the blue part, which is B, and then the red part is end. So it's bounce light. So it's like we're starting in the exhibition at the end. And at the left side is the USA flag, which is made out of this special safety material, which allows when you take a flash photo of the piece, it kind of becomes this really vibrant hypercolor USA flag. So if you see in the next, I think in the next frame, yeah. So this is what it looks normally, and then when you take a flash photo of that piece, then it kind of activates and becomes this hypercolor USA flag, which I thought that like the performative action of taking a photo of the flag and then activating it was very American. The show is like really kind of different, like how American culture and Filipino culture kind of differ, in that Filipino culture is really, it's community based, whereas like American culture is more about like the individual and like what the individual can achieve. And then how to kind of balance between the two. So this is what people kind of walk into. It's like also my personal journey of saying, I'm going to leave the US and I'm going now to the Philippines.
What went into that decision?
Moving to the Philippines. So I had, I grew up in the States at 18. And then when I went to New York, I was there for 7 years, Tokyo for 2 years, Dubai for 6 years, moving back to New York. Then at 2012 to 2020, I was in New York. And then, I think 4 years ago, I started showing in Manila. I had gotten connected to Isa and Rach, who run Silverlens Gallery. And so the 2 years before the pandemic, I had come back and started showing work in the region. I just found it so active, and it really reminded me of like when I was in Dubai and really involved in the art scene there. And you have these conversations with artists, and you start to understand like the role of like the link between like arts and culture. And that if you become a practicing artist within that culture, like when I was in Dubai, I was hosting art like installations and really becoming active, in that art scene. You can start to see how it kind of filters into what the cultural identity is. And I thought, I'm Filipino American, and this is like a side of me that I hadn't explored. And in the States, I could say I'm a Filipino American, but I never grew up in the Philippines. I didn't really understand it. And for me to really understand it, I have to move there. I have to live there, and I have to become integrated into the society, start to talk to artists and make work while I'm there. If that's what I wanted to be, if I wanted to explore that side of me. So this is a series that I did, and then this is related to the fish tank, which is in the exhibition. But what I did is I started interviewing parents of artists here in the Philippines, and I started asking them in this video series to describe their kids' work. And so what it is like this kind of tangential portrait of the artists themselves, but through the filter of their parents' eyes. And so when we grow up, like our idea of identity and culture is like really instilled in us through our parents. That's the most direct way that we understand who we are. And so, I wanted to understand like how other artists' parents and how other artists, like the environment that they grew up in, and how they understand what they work, and like how they understand their work and how the parents understand their work. Because also in the Philippines, it's not really that common to be an artist. It's like still not like, it's not a common job. If you say you're an artist, it's not, a lot of people are kind of confused about that. So people who are artists or cultural workers, sometimes they even struggle with their parents, because they're like, my parents don't really understand so much like what I'm doing, or other artists' parents, they don't, it's just, it's a curiosity, and I think also like, because the art scene here is becoming more globalized, it's also kind of a documentation for like where arts is now. Because when our generation starts to have kids, or the next generation, it starts to open up, our understanding, of course, is going to be, we'll know more about like the link between arts and culture. But the generation before it's still pretty fresh.
And what
So
did your parents contribute?
What's that?
Oh, keep talking about the piece. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Oh, so in the exhibition, I took these videos. I had 4 sets of parents of artists, and I'm kind of expanding the series. But I have them in the installation in the exhibition, where I'm showing the videos through this deep, like polarized film. So the white video that you see in the white square in the back is actually where the video is coming from. But on a fish tank, there's a film that allows you to see the video within the fish tank itself. So I guess in the next frame, you can see closer this fish tank in the gallery with these fish swimming around and these parents talking about their kids. And so I kind of imagined it like a film, almost like filmic. So,
Well, it almost looked like a movie for the fish.
Yeah, it's almost like a movie for the fish, or like the fish are the kids maybe, or in my mind, it was like this serious moment in a film where the camera just pans on something else, and you hear the audio and like this reflection of, the serious thing that's happening kind of in the background. So it kind of, just makes it more tangential,
So the questions I had when I interrupted you was, what did your parents say about your artwork, and what do your parents think about you moving to the Philippines?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I love my parents. They have been very supportive, even though they don't really quite understand the medium that I do and the art that I do. And you'll see, like, if you watch the videos, they're on there, and they're like, we don't really know what James does, because he doesn't do a 9-to-5 job. But he seems to be doing okay, but we have no idea what he's actually doing. There's definitely a disconnect between what I'm doing and what they understand what I'm doing. I mean, they know that I'm surviving, so for them that's okay. I think that's basically that's the most that they understand what's happening. I mean, and even like the move back to the Philippines, it took them a while to also, I mean, they came this January, which is when I caught them in the studio. I was like, hey, come visit my studio. And then I sat them down and I was like, okay, I'm going to interview you guys. I didn't tell them what I was doing. I was like, here, you sit here. Mom and dad, you sit here. And this is my friend. She's going to interview you for this project that I'm doing. So they had no idea that I was going to interview them. But prior to them coming to the Philippines this last winter, I think they just kind of didn't really know what I was doing back in the Philippines when they spent so much time trying to get out.
Yeah, exactly. That's the interesting conflict that I would imagine would be there. And you showed for several times in New York at Jane Lombard Gallery too. Did they come to those shows?
No, they hadn't come to. I think maybe they saw one of the Jane Lombard shows while it was still up. Yeah, so I had two shows with Jane Lombard. One was focusing on Japanese video gamers, and then another one is right when I kind of moved back from Dubai.
And is it because you work in technology and light and these type of things? Would they understand better if you were a painter?
I actually maybe. Yeah, I think because the medium is like really experimental and more on the conceptual end, that I think like they don't really, there's not something that's like kind of traditional with the medium. And, when I went to NYU, actually, I went like my first year I was there at business school. So and then I switched into film after freshman year. So I think from that point on, they kind of didn't really know what I was doing.
Yes. Okay. What are we looking at here?
So this is photos of the CCP, which is a museum here in Manila. It hosts the 13 Artists Award. It was built by the Marcoses, and I was doing research for the exhibition back in September, and I started to become fascinated by the light fixtures in the museum. As a technology, or because my background is film, so I'm interested in these kind of light technologies. And this light fixture in the museum, I started thinking about the amount of culture that this light fixture allowed people to see, and how much culture and art this light fixture has seen itself. So I took photos of it, and in the next slide, you can see I recreated that light fixture in a 3D program. And then in the next slide, in the exhibition itself, then I used it to create a light work within the exhibition. So I started these light works are something that I started developing in the last year and a half, using these LED lights and filters, and I'm creating these geometric structures that exist flat and 2D on the wall, but I'm using light fixtures to really block off areas of light, so that way I can have strong geometric shapes of color, but then also recreating the color from the 3D program, so it has this kind of 3D effect.
Right, it's really uncanny. I mean, for people who haven't seen the exhibition, this looks as if it's a three-dimensional object protruding from the wall, when it is absolutely flat on the wall with LED light. So it made me think about light and the power of light in a different way.
Yeah, it's like because I'm modeling in 3D, and then I'm using the colors from the 3D program for the filters of the physical structure. So it's actually giving off the light that it would in the 3D program, and that similar shading. So it's using the wall itself as a projection space, like as a physical space to bounce the light back, but then the light that's bounced back is like the 3D program. So it really recreates this kind of 3D effect. And then by using the geometry of the aluminum structure of this itself to block off light, generally like when you have light art or like neon pieces, the light just kind of spreads around the room. But I'm able to kind of like really stop and start segments of light.
Yeah, it's amazing control. Amazing control. Yes, let's get to Hidilyn. How do you say her name?
Heidelin.
Hidilyn
Heidelin.
Diaz.
Yeah. So when Easton Race asked me to do the show for New York, and I had lived in New York for like 15 years total, I started to, in the research, I really wanted to work with Heidelin Diaz. And Heidelin Diaz is the first Olympic gold medalist for the Philippines. She's the first and only Olympic gold medalist for the Philippines, and she won gold in the Tokyo Olympics 2020 for weightlifting. So and she's a national hero here in the Philippines. She's somebody who's really, despite her upbringing, has achieved she's become the best in the world. And so she hits these markers of like Asian, female, Filipino, and then just fighting against all those markers to become like the top in the world. And when I was in New York, especially during the pandemic, there was all these things like Asian hate was happening, and these things were, it's just kind of started to really affect me. It wasn't the cause for me to move, but to lesser degrees, I mean, that's been happening all the time.
But did it make you more aware of your Asian identity?
The Asian hate
Yeah.
crimes, not so much. I mean, it just more or less like maybe livid, because like the people that they were targeting could have been my parents. I mean, they were like really targeting the, yeah. But I mean, this idea of like, Asians and like just like targeting them, they're seeing them as docile. The idea of like working with Heidelin was to kind of counter that, and to show that somebody like her could be the most powerful in the world. So I had started visiting her since last September, visiting her training camp and talking to her about art. And at first she was like a little bit shy. She didn't understand like what the point was of getting involved in it. But through all this like time starting to spend with her, she started to open up and we started talking about art. And then she could see, there's a lot of parallels between artists and athletes, especially in the Philippines, and like what she's trying to, what she has achieved and what she's had to fight against even locally here to achieve that. So she became really supportive. And here are photos of, so for the artworks in the exhibition, I connected her to an EEG unit and started reading her brainwaves while she was working out, while she is watching her 2020 Olympic performance. So like a memory of something, great in the past, and then also sleeping. So sleeping is like kind of potential energy. And so in the exhibition itself, next slide, the brainwaves and the brainwave data we have playing on this 6-meter tall LED panel that is facing against the wall and then facing towards the wall. So the light from the EEG unit, the light from her brainwaves kind of spreads across the gallery walls. Next slide. So using the light technique that I've been doing, this is parole number 1. And the parole is like a traditional lantern. I think it was introduced by the Spanish, so it has colonial kind of aspects to it, but they use it a lot during the Christmas season, and it's like the North Star. Mm-hmm. So that is in the exhibition. And then next slide. Next to it is the structural light piece called mag wheels, and that's placed on top of a metal piece that was crushed by Heidelin, throwing weights onto it. Next slide. So the mag wheels, what I do in the studio is I build these, I've been building these kind of Texas gritty structures for a few years now, like even back in Dubai. And what I do is I create them in the process is I create them out of wood first and use the kind of 1-to-1 lengths. So I can kind of work them by hand. And then once I have the structure down, then I can recreate it using electrical wires and LED lights. So the mag wheels are a reference to Heidelin. When she first started working out, she has to use mag wheels to work out because they couldn't afford weights. So they're putting mag wheels on metal bars and then lifting those as kids. So you can see like kind of the mag wheel, the hubcap in the front, and then the structure of the wood, and then the light pieces behind it. The next slide.
Yeah, and that's like amazing information to have about her that that you shared with me about the rudimentary way she trained and the heights she has gotten to. That's like just a wonderful, hopeful story.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's really like what she kind of represents also here. I mean, you know, the Philippines is like, there's not many of those kind of national heroes that reach the global stage. So for them, it's like really, you know, bringing hope to their people, despite the fact that she grew up, you know, she grew up poor.
Yeah.
And even like when you visit her training camp now, she does a lot for the community in the small town that she's in. But you know, you would think that somebody who's like the top in the world would be like have the best equipment, but even now they're kind of working with like really rudimentary like materials. But you know, that's also one of the appeals of like weightlifting, is that it's not a very complicated sport with like extra gear. It's really kind of a personal sport. It's like you and then like how far you mentally and physically can push yourself. And it's not even like a team sport. It's really just like how far individually you can, you know, achieve things. Next slide. So this is a large tensegrity. So this structure is hanging in the gallery. And so, you know, spending time watching Highland's training camp, and then through conversations with my friend who's also a fitness instructor, we started talking about how the human body itself is kind of interconnected, and a tensegrity structure itself. So this is it's a tensegrity structure based off the pelvis, and the pelvis is the center of gravity for a woman. So in weightlifting and for Highland, it's the area that provides kind of stability, core strength, and power. And so we kind of created this large structure that hangs in the gallery. It's turned on its side, so the figure is sleeping, which again is kind of referencing like kind of this potential energy. Next slide. Parole number 4. So this is a larger version of the parole, the single star. And I took photos of it using a kaleidoscopic lens, which kind of fractalized it. And then I used that photo as the basis for this larger piece, this new piece. So it's kind of taking this 3D geometry and then abstracting it. But also I like this conversation between the single star and this one. So this one kind of represents the community, and the single star is the individual. So
and people can't imagine, this is huge, just takes up the entire height of the gallery wall. So you know,
yeah, it's a large, yeah, it's a really large piece. And yeah, I'm just trying to, you know, figure out ways, almost I guess like a painter, where I'm trying to break the image and break the geometry of these kind of 3D light effects. But also, like, you know, the original title for the exhibition was called Walang Hiya, which is without shame. So the idea of Walang Hiya in the Philippines is it has like multiple meanings, and sometimes it's like if you're too boastful, they see that negatively. It's like you have no shame. But in the States, we're told to just, you know, be proud of who you are, have pride, you know, stand out, shine, you know. So there's this kind of like different like viewpoints between American culture and even like diaspora Filipinos who grew up in America versus Filipinos who grew up locally here. And so there's this kind of like, conversation of like, how do you be pride? Like, how do you have pride to be a Filipino without being boastful? You know? So I think you know, even with like Heidelin or within the exhibition itself, there's kind of like that conversation happening. Next slide. So, and we'll see this video later. This collaborative piece that I did with Heidelin, I had her lifting her weights and then dropping down her weights to crush these large pieces of metal. So the action of what she does for a living then was utilized to create these artworks. Next slide. So the metal that she's used, this is laid out. The artworks were laid out, or the metal pieces are laid out there. And next slide.
Right.
So so in the gallery, then it's like kind of laid out as this kind of landscape, and it reflects kind of the space in the gallery. And I consider it almost like a landscape. It's a sculptural piece, but I like the idea that what she's doing as a person is also warping the reality around her, because she's such a national hero that she's also like starting to kind of change the perception of like who Filipinos can be or what they can achieve on the global stage. And I think that's like a lot of, sorry?
No, I also think there's this interesting relationship, like in modernism, we'd like to talk about the artist's touch. And like Pollack throwing his body into making the work. And this is someone throwing their body, and it's not the artist, but it's, a physical storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is also something that's been happening since I've moved here to the Philippines, is like starting to see these kind of cultural elements, or like what can be achieved here in the Philippines, and using that as like an artistic medium in ways. So like collaborating with Heidelin is, she is the artistic tool for the piece, and in the end we'll see some videos of some other pieces that I created here locally. But I mean, I think that's like something that's like starting to expand in my practices, because also like I think because now I'm in the Philippines, there's the capability to do that, whereas maybe in the States, it might be more difficult,
How so?
Well, in particular, there's this piece with Ayala Museum, I think would be difficult to do. And also this the laser dog piece, which we'll see a video, might be difficult to do. Yeah. But I mean, with Heidelin, it's just that, you tie in the narrative element of who she is and what she does for a living, and then use that kind of as the palette in the work.
Yeah, very interesting. Very, very interesting.
And so this is a video piece. It's a render of methane waves. So it's this one's a little bit more sci-fi, and it's leading into the main space where most of the Heidelin project is. But the methane waves is this 3D render. There's Titan is a moon on Saturn, and they have oceans of methane. And when you watch the video piece, you'll see that the waves are there. And if you look at it, you can see that they don't behave like normal water waves do. And so life evolved on Earth because we have water, and we're kind of based around that, and our consciousness and the way that we function is based on that. So if there's other life forms on other planets and they're based on methane, the way that their reality or their consciousness is going to be very different. The illusion is towards like the environment that you grow up in affects kind of how you evolve, basically. And so like the screen itself has a dichroic filter on it. Next slide. So when you see it from different angles, then it kind of shifts. So it's almost like looking at gasoline on a sidewalk. You'll see kind of this rainbow effect. Next slide. And then the final piece in the show is this small work, this video piece, and it's all these bubbles. I started filming bubbles in a fish tank going up, and then I stabilized the bubbles so that they just stay center frame. And so you have this sphere that kind of undulates, and sometimes the bubble splits off into multiple bubbles, sometimes other bubbles kind of join into it. But it's kind of creating this kind of narrative of a bubble trying to reach the surface, but it's stitched in a way that's just kind of never ending journey of the bubble before it reaches the surface, and then it doesn't become a bubble anymore.
And what is it? How does it relate to the other works, and what does?
So I think, in the exhibition itself, it's more of like a personal narrative. So the first segment is me leaving the States. The second section with the fish tank and the CCP light is kind of a questioning about like Filipino culture, like what is Filipino culture, where do we get that from? And then the main room is a Heidelin project. So like, what is the potential for a person? What's the potential for a person or a culture? Like what can somebody achieve, or who says they can or can't do something? So that's the kind of the story arc of the exhibition itself. This small video piece is called The Journey. So it's just like the journey, like our own personal journey. So it's kind of this kind of poetic piece of, yeah, just a bubble kind of going towards the surface until it doesn't exist anymore. The next slide. So here's some process photos in the studio. Yeah, you can see like that's kind of building the CCP light, and I'll use 3D printed material. I model everything in 3D, and then we're cutting the LED lights to the millimeter and then wiring them together. Next slide. This is building the end.
Amazing.
So
did you assemble these in the gallery?
That's in my studio in Manila.
Okay.
Yeah. So some of them I build on the floor just because the ceilings aren't too high, but you know, we just kind of utilize any space possible. Next slide. This is building parole number 4. And yeah, again, we built it on the floor in my studio. Next slide. So these are photos of the exhibition that I had in Manila, which is in 2021. And that's called Share Location. And that was in Silverlens in Manila. So this is like a few months after I had moved to Manila. So the exhibition was called Share Location, which is this technological function of your phone. Like you allow your phone to share the location of where you are. And I wanted this to be like an exhibition saying that, okay, I'm here in the Philippines and now we share location. And what does that mean to be physically in the same space as other people and with, you know, other artists from the Philippines? And now I'm going to share location with you guys and have this kind of conversation to understand like what the Philippines is or what Philippine identity is. On the
sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
On the left are these 2 clocks, and they are networked and they follow the location of the sun. And every minute it follows the sun as it travels around the world. And every minute it'll show a city where the sun is currently rising and also where the sun is currently setting. And it just kind of has this database where it just keeps updating it all the time because the arc of the sun is changing. So it's just constantly updating the database. So it's like in real time, you can see, you can Google the city that it's showing and then see that it's like the sun is currently setting at or rising in that city.
Before you moved to the Philippines, how many times had you visited the Philippines and what did you know about the art scene there?
So I would go with my parents to the Philippines maybe every 3 to 4 years growing up. But you know, when I was doing that, it's like mostly aunts and uncles' houses, not really exploring, just like hanging out with cousins. And then when I came back from Dubai to live in New York, then I think, you know, my experience in Dubai kind of triggered things to become more and more curious about like what is happening in the Philippines, or that I should have like a larger presence in Asia, or just like live in Asia and just try to understand that. 4 years ago, then that's when I got connected to Ethan Rage, who runs Silverlens Gallery. And yeah, that's when they invited me to start showing with them. And then I started, really started to become more active here and just kind of coming here once or twice a year. And then talking with other artists here. And I was like, you know, fascinated by like how active it is, like how many artists there are working here. And it just seemed like there's like so much depth to explore, just personally, and also just with all the stuff that other artists are doing. So when the pandemic happened and New York shut down, then it seemed like, okay, now's the time I should do it because I can't do anything in New York right now, you know? Yeah. And, you know, I felt like at that time, New York, you know, I had been there again for like another 8 years. And in terms of my own artistic career or my own personal life, it just would bring more, more, I'd just be more fulfilled and just bring more interesting information to explore if I moved.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Next slide. So then this is inside the gallery. On the right-hand side, you'll see this 8-screen composition, which is this video piece I did in Manila, where I had tricycles driving around 2 karaoke machines and then dragging the microphones from the karaoke machines up behind it. So it's picking up the vibrations of the road and then amplifying it, and just kind of translating the physical space of the city into sound. And so we're driving that around Manila and just kind of blasting this kind of noise from the 2 tricycles. And then the 2 karaoke machines are kind of like stand-ins for 2 people kind of talking about like what the city is or what the city means to them. Next slide. Yeah, so we'll see a video of this. Run Dog Wild is a piece I made when I first moved to Manila, and it was like 6 p.m. curfew and then 8 p.m. curfew. So the city was like still shut down here also, similar to New York, and the streets were like empty. So what I did is I mounted a laser projector and a camera to a car, and then we drove around Manila. And since there was no traffic, we were able to kind of drive really smoothly through the city. And then I projected this animation of a dog running with the laser projector. So I'm overlapping this kind of virtual space with the real space. And at that time, because like nobody could go outside, it's like this virtual, we want it to be like this dog running free, but everyone's kind of locked inside.
Can I ask you something? When you do a piece like this, does it feel empowering? Because I would think it's very exciting to do something like this and impose it on the city.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, it's an experiment. I didn't like know actually, because I had to test like different shapes, and I was like, I was like, I wonder, I bet I can use a laser and shoot that from a car. And because the geometry of the city changes, or like things go back in perspective, but if the camera is locked to the same position as the laser, it's just keeping the same perspective. So the laser will always stay in focus. So I tested that out, and I was like, okay, this is an amazing system. Let's, now I can have something running around, or have this kind of like virtual dog running around. But that's what it meant, like in term, like before, saying that moving to the Philippines now opens up kind of this different area to explore, because I couldn't do this in New York. Like I would have been stopped by cops, or but here there's still a gray area in terms of what public art is, or even what art is. And you can function in ways that like you can do things that are difficult to do in the States, because somebody will know it right away, or the cops will be like, where's your permit, But we had like cops driving by this, and like motorcyclists, and they thought it was amazing. They were just like waving to the camera.
It's also a way of introducing the city to people.
Yeah. I mean, it's like just kind of utilizing the city space, and just kind of making it, again, like Heidelman, just trying to use it as part of the artwork. Next slide. And so this is a large-scale installation I did for Ayala Museum. The vehicle on the right is this award-winning parole from Pampanga, and so they have this competition there where they have these animated light objects retrofitted on trucks, and they're huge. They're like 20 feet diameter, these light fixtures. I had watched them one Christmas, and then I went back to see how, I couldn't figure out how the lighting system worked. I was like, is it DMX or computer controlled? But when I went behind, after the show, I was like so curious. So I went to behind the piece, and there are these trucks with these metal cylinders, and the metal cylinders are just electrified with AC power. And then they rotate the cylinders almost like a music box with all the wiring, open wires that trigger off the lights. So it's like this completely analog way of doing these animations. And I was like, this is so crazy. Like there has to be a way to kind of utilize this. Earlier, or I think later that summer, my friend called me, and I said, you know what? I was in the States, and I said, just tell me, because I just moved to the Philippines and I'm trying to understand, and I don't know Tagalog yet. I don't know the language. Tell me the national anthem, and I'm going to write down what I think I hear. So she said the national anthem, and I wrote it down with my own like diaspora brain of understanding what the language was. And so it was like all incorrect, right? So I wrote down the national anthem as like filtered through my incorrect like diaspora brain. And so for the exhibition, what we did is I had the curator of Ayala Museum correct it, like right on the letter. And then we used that, wrapped that around the metal cylinders to trigger off the lights. So the light itself are triggered through my misunderstanding of what the misunderstanding and then correction of what the national anthem is. So it's like this huge installation that's about kind of understanding culture.
And misunderstanding.
And misunderstanding culture as like a foreigner. And so like that, yeah, and so the piece itself is called I Can't Tell You What I Don't Know, Only That I Don't Know. And so I'm just, because I know I'm new to the scene, and I'm not saying that, because how can I tell people what Filipinos are if I'm new here? I can only say that I'm trying to explore things and that I don't know. So, teach me.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So this summer I'm curating a show at Jane Lumber Gallery, and it's a selection of artists, about 12 artists that I've met here in the Philippines. And the idea was to kind of bring just a spectrum of artists that are working and living here in the Philippines, and then bring them there for a summer group show.
Great.
Yeah, so
I'm so excited. I can't wait to see it.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited too. I mean, all the artists are really excited. A lot of them have never shown in New York before, but it's just like a great way to expose both sides, expose them to New York, and also have New Yorkers see kind of a wide selection of artists practicing here.
And James, before we go on, what's the title of the show and when is it opening?
The title of the show is called Island Time, and it's at Jane Lumber Gallery. It's going to open June 22nd.
Great.
In Tribeca. Yeah, and so the idea of also like Island Time is like, it's artists living and working in the Philippines, and their kind of subjective experience of time as somebody who's an islander. But it's also like a way to kind of recapture that phrase, island time, which is slightly derogatory, or had been used as a derogatory way to say like people who don't run on like Western capitalist structures,
right?
Like people from the islands are like lazy or slow, So it's just like saying that these are mid-career artists that kind of function here.
Exactly.
So yeah, so to round out the presentation, there's like I have 4 artists from that exhibition. The first one was the previous one was Gary Ross Pastrana. And he studied as a painter. He largely works as a conceptual artist here. He deconstructs materials to expose hidden and new meanings. His piece in the exhibition, what he did is he took a silver dollar here. It's a US silver peso. So when the US occupied the Philippines, they had these silver dollars, which are single pesos, but has the says USA on it. So he's filing them down into silver dust. And then he's using spray adhesive, and then putting it down to the window of the gallery. But it's also like a reference to silver gelatin, which is used for photographs. So he considers it kind of like a photographic piece, or deconstructed photograph. Next slide. This is Corinda San Jose. So she's a professional background as a sound designer. And she's worked with some really well-known directors here, like Lab Diaz, Eric Madi, Ryan Martin. And she did an exhibition at Silverlens here in Manila in January. And it was based on Dalagan Bukid, which is Country Maiden, which is supposedly the first film that ever was created in the Philippines. There's no original copies of it have been found. So it's all based on kind of research. And so the Philippines is like really, they've traditionally been really bad at archiving. And what's interesting is that usually for the arts, it's like, tell us about the future, tell us about like what the future is, because the past is already set. But in the Philippines, the past is also permeable. It's like also like malleable, because there's just not a lot of like documented history for in various mediums. So yeah, so she kind of works in that area. Next slide. This is Miguel Acalizan. So he is doing something based on mahogany. So mahogany was introduced here in the Philippines in 1907 as park trees in Manila. Mahogany tree was also used as a species for reforestation in 1913, but it's actually like an invasive species. And so they're having a huge issue with it here because it has an impact on the industrial side of the country as the wood is used in various ways in daily life, but it's affected the natural ecology, and it creates these kind of biodiversity dead zones. So it's something that they're trying to figure out like how to fix. So he's doing an installation in the gallery using mahogany wood that he's actually bringing from Los Baños, where he grew up. Next slide. And then this is Shireen Seno. She's an artist and filmmaker who addresses memory, history, and image making, often in relation to the idea of home. And so over the past few years, she's been creating a series based on the migration of birds in the Philippines. And it's inspired by her father's memory of migration to the US. And so it's a security desk. And then there's all these security screens.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, on the security screens, it's actually just videos of these migratory birds.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really nice. Actually, it's being shown right now in Berlin. She just had a solo.
So do these artists have international careers, or do you feel you discovered them, or what?
They haven't had a lot of exposure outside. I mean, Shireen Seno largely works as a filmmaker. So she's done stuff in like film festivals, but she's slowly starting to show more at art galleries. Miguel, it's interesting. His parents are actually as part of the interview series that I did, because his parents are kind of famous artists here in the Philippines.
Oh,
so
interesting.
he has kind of a different, he has a different issues he had different issues to deal with growing up, because he kind of lives in the shadow of his parents as like these kind of famous artists here. I don't, the artists that I've met here, there's so much talent, but I don't feel like a lot of them had exposure outside of the Philippines. And so like for Silverlens to open up a gallery in Chelsea has had such a huge impact here. And it's really kind of opened up this kind of cultural dialogue between New York and Manila, for sure.
Do you feel there's a political side to doing a show of Filipino artists?
How do you mean?
I mean, does it comment on social or political issues in addition to presenting these experimental aesthetics?
There are, social realism is a big section of art that happens here. One of the artists in the show, Leslie Chavez, he'll have a painting in the exhibition this summer also that is like, his work is like really heavily political, and he has like a community-based project space in the south of Manila, south of Manila. There is quite a lot of political art here. When I was in Dubai, I was doing a lot of socio-political art in that region, because that's a lot of what the conversation is there. But I think for me, I think I'm in a different space personally, but there is a lot that happens here.
What do you mean by a different space? I think it's
I think I'm like more interested in like how Filipinos, like the aesthetics of what I see every day, like how why a chair looks like that. Like when I see a chair out in the street, like why does it look like that? Why does the coloring look like that? Or the architecture here, there's a lot of brutalist architecture or Spanish architecture, where these things kind of come from historically. But there's a lot of artists that work in the kind of leftist politics space here. Yeah.
I was curious about that.
Yeah.
All right. Is next the videos?
Yes, I
Yeah.
believe so.
Yes, so just give us 1 second. We'll pull those videos up.
So this is Heidelin using the weights to crush the metal for the piece in the exhibition.
How much weight is that?
It's like 80 kilograms. I think they went up to like 110 that
Uh-huh.
day, which is like over 200 pounds.
Wow.
And then I think the next one is Run Dog Wild.
Love this.
Yeah, so we can't, like, it'd be impossible to do this nowadays, even here, because there's so much traffic. The only reason we could do that is because like everyone was like locked, like there's like lockdown, and so the roads were really clear. But pretty much Manila at any point of the night, there's like a lot of traffic.
Yeah, but I've also heard from artists throughout Asia that Americans often feel like everybody has the most freedom here. Why would they move there? But there's a lot of lack of regulation, let's call it, that allows artists to do things they would not be able to do here.
Yeah, for sure. And that was like the thing with like, when I was living in Dubai, it felt like that too. It's like if, people would always say, oh, Dubai is like, there's no culture there. But that just means that there's an opening for that conversation. Everybody knows what a New Yorker is, or for somebody from London or somebody from Paris. But when that identity isn't solidified yet, then that means that, like, as an arts worker, that you can be part of that conversation. Like this piece was like the logistics to get this piece done. The town that it came from was it took 2 days for us to drive that truck down the highway. And once we got into Manila, we had to have a 6-cop car convoy shutting down the highway and allowing this giant truck to kind of stream down to the museum. So yeah, and then just kind of logistics of getting that done through the connections here, we were able to kind of do that. Whereas like I think it'd be difficult to do that in the States.
Very interesting. We now are able to take questions if there are questions, but I think all of this and like where you locate yourself and how you view yourself is a fascinating part of your art making. It's just, and that you are now bringing Filipino artists to New York is a fascinating generosity on your part.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think it's like really not, just because I grew up in Wisconsin and didn't have any exposure to, as I was saying before, Filipinos in popular culture or in media, that just became a question, like an immediate question from the time I was born, is like, what are, who are Filipinos and what is our culture?
Well, do people have any questions or comments?
Yes, thank you both so much for such an amazing conversation. So we do have a question first from our friend GE. Can go ahead and unmute. And if anybody else has a question, feel free to put it in the chat or you can raise your hand. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Carolyn, Barbara, and James. This is astounding, and it triggers so much in so many wonderful different ways. It's got so many connections to it. What would you say is the relation of human nature, and technology in your works, especially in the way that they try to replicate chaotic and natural processes?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think, I've with the goldfish, it's definitely this kind of like natural, kind of chaotic system. Not chaotic, but it's like natural system overlaid with like kind of a technology system. And even like, Heidelin is a living person and she's like part of the artwork. So there's another like kind of natural system or a cultural system there that's present. I think there's different like kind of dualities, like nature versus nurture also is kind of part of the show in terms of identity. Yeah, and I've done other works with other natural systems too. Yeah, I think that's there because I think, technology is so present in how we live nowadays. So you're trying to understand like what that effect is on how we perceive things or on how we function. I think it's hard to be only completely natural or completely like computerized. Everything is kind of like a blur between the two nowadays.
Yeah, and I was so struck by Heidelin's, dropping the weights on the metal sheets is almost a printmaking technique, which also, which in a way, which also allows for chaos and then an informative stuff that's going on. So that's where I came in.
Nice, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, GE. I have a question. Actually, I'm thinking about how movement, which has been talked about before, but the process is really inherent in the work. Like even though it's a still sculpture, I find them to be kind of still moving, or the process is very much there. And I'm wondering about that in relation to the title, more Force of Nature, or if you just want to talk about where that title came from a little bit more, but maybe, there's like a sense of gravity or, this real movement that I find in the still works even.
Yeah, for sure. And you'll see that a lot in like also works like prior to this. So I studied film at NYU, but also the focus then became, I started out in directing and then I went into animation actually. So animation and then 3D animation. So I think a lot of like how I break down movement is like frames of time. And so you start with like the bouncing ball is like one of the early exercises in like hand-drawn animation. And you start to break down like then movement into like frames of time also. So I think like even when I do still like structural lighting pieces, there is a lot of like kind of movement expressed in that. The title, like By Force of Nature, as I was saying, like the original title is called Walang, which is more about this conversation of how does an individual express their own kind of cultural identity in a way that's like respectful but also like pride, like with pride, which is kind of this conversation between like diaspora or American ways of being versus kind of local Filipino ways of being. By Force of Nature then is more, it's more about like nature versus nurture, how we're like the force of nature is like kind of, or the environment kind of forces us to be certain ways.
Cool, thank you so much. Let's see, our next question is going to be from Chloe. Go ahead.
James, thanks so much for this conversation. Thanks, Barbara, as well. It's been so magnificent hearing you speak about the work on View and about your practice. My question has to do with movement. When you're reading the exhibition text, it comes up, and I'm piggybacking off of Carolyn a little bit here, but so much of your practice has been impacted by your movement, specifically across countries and cultures and spaces, and responding to those. And, a few years ago, you moved to the Philippines. And I guess I'm just wondering if you think that movement cross-culturally will continue to be a part of your practice, or if there was intention when you moved to the Philippines to sort of be there for a while, and sort of how you think about your own movement and your own sense of place relative to the work and to your future goals with the work?
Yeah, I mean, for now, this is home for me. I think, it's not difficult, thankfully, to travel nowadays. And this is the kind of the home base where I am, and having conversations with all the artists and other people here, and really trying to understand like the culture here. But also it's, because I grew up in the States, so I kind of understand like how things are there. It just kind of yeah, you have this alternate, like these areas that are kind of alternate or different, and they kind of allow you to kind of view things differently. And I think also because I'm a diaspora born Filipino, there's still this element of like being an outsider in a way, which is always like in like Dubai also, or wherever I've lived, that's always been the case. But it's nice because it puts you in this kind of like a observation kind of mode where I think the conversations that I have with people, I'm asking like very basic questions sometimes to them, but it also has them starting to think of like why that is. And then you have these kind of nice conversations about like where the lineage of that train of thought or that aesthetic could come from.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you feel like your journey from country to country and through your education and all of that makes you situated where you can get closer to what is universal in aesthetics or in an art project?
I don't know.
Borders.
Sorry, what's that?
Something that crosses borders or cultural boundaries.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think artists are always like kind of world building anyways. So I'm not sure if what they create or the way that they process things is necessarily for the general society. In some ways, it could just be an observation of like how things are and what works for them.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, maybe it does filter into kind of how the general society will function later on, but I'm not sure if that's necessarily the case immediately.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you for those answers, James. And I would just add, as someone who's moved around a lot myself, there's this element of being entrenched in another culture and sort of the innate examination of the self that results from that experience, and being able to like really see so clearly inwardly like what your experience was uniquely relative to others, and just the culture of your life. So it's fascinating to see you examine that in your work and in your practice, and just I'm really thankful for this conversation today.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chloe. Yeah, thank you for a brilliant conversation. Here at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading, and I'm so thrilled to welcome Farnaz Fatemi here today. Farnaz Fatemi is an Iranian-American poet and writer, and Santa Cruz County Poet Laureate for 2023 and 24. Farnaz is a founding member of the Hive Poetry Collective. Her book, Sister Tongue, was published in September 2022 and won the 2021 Stan and Tom Wick Poetry Prize, selected by Tracy K. Smith. Her poems and lyric essays appear in several web and print publications. Thank you so much, Farnaz, for being here today. I'll pass it over to you. Oh, you're just muted, I think. Oh.
Thank you. I couldn't do it myself. Thank you for having me at the end of such a great conversation. And it's serendipitously, there's a lot of crossover between what you've been talking about and some of the poems. I've got 5 poems I'm going to share with you today. And I just rearranged because I'm going to start with one called The Only Mistranslation. And I really have been thinking a lot about the examination of self within different cultures As an Iranian American, I spent many trips, but also I've lived in Iran, not recently. It was over 15 years ago, but so much of the book that I'm reading from, which is Sister Tongue, as mentioned, really engages with these questions of what happens, the diaspora brain. I loved that phrase that I loved that James said. So in diaspora brain, I'll start. The only mistranslation is belonging. There is no word for it in any of my tongues. There are no tongues, so maybe that's my trouble. How to find a word inside a vacuum. The din itself is home, but home was never a hearth, and that explains some things. I belong deep inside my own gut, digesting seeds rained from my ancestors' dreams, where compasses keep spinning, where an avalanche of rare earth blankets any inkling of sun. I belong to my own hungry future, never oriented on the map and never slaked. A lover once looked down the well of my lungs and called me nomad. I shook her off, but she was right about a magnet that keeps moving in the night, stealing off to a different north. Stealing off to a new north, I confound myself as if I were a butterfly resisting pins. And this is called pleats. Sister, let's fold time back on itself. We can pleat it. We'll push our needle through the fold, find silk pants and ruby thread, pull the Qajar dynasty toward us with our stitch, loop under to anchor, punch the needle through again, and look for Farouk's poems. We'll add a flourish and move on, hips thickening with the ornament of our history. We'll go back and visit the forced unveiling when our sisters watched their futures arrive, like we do. Soak our fabric in the tears of change. How quickly it absorbs. We'll bring them code that needs translation, miniskirts and thigh highs, words on the tongues of our men we need to solve. This pleat can turn under, part of the structure of the dress itself, pinned with a stitch of our hair to show it was us there whenever the unraveling comes. When we reach back into this orphaned future in which we tuck ourselves, we'll pin both sides of the rousserie at our chins to free our hands and slip things into our hems. This smartphone, that Excedrin PM, a degree in computer science and math. For what good they do. And this is called Sword-Shaped Heart. In the Birder's Dictionary, I read about a bone near the bird's heart called xiphoid, meaning sword-shaped. My fingers reach for my ribs. If my father's anger were shaped like his swimming pool instead of a sword, he could sink down under the surface and listen. I could return my sword-shaped heart and pick out something else. If my husband's pain were cup-shaped, he could add milk, then drink. I'd cut out my tongue and grow a more tender one. If the martyr's vision landed on his mother's oleander, he could soak up the rich scarlet of its flowers. His mother could join him. They could stare and exclaim. I could dream up a new language to speak to martyrs. If all the fathers could find themselves on the maps they're born with, they could free their eyes to look that way. I would wait on the road, ready to paint a ruby X to mark their spot. And this is a poem which has as its center a vision that I actually saw. And I want to say that there's a word in here, leucistic or leucistic, and it means like albino, having a lack of pigmentation. The woman in the white chador stands on the flat roof of a house in Masule. Perhaps she left lunch behind on the stove to edge out onto the layer cake of terraced houses on the hillside, one row above the other, roofs turning into roads below. She is not an idea. Erect, draped, one arm crosses the bright white of her chest to hold the swath in place as she looks down. Leucistic bird, occurrence. The windows below her are wide open. The fog rolls up the hill below us, peers over our shoulders and into all the houses as if to move us inside. She could call us to prayer and I would. She was born where I wasn't. She is so white, she shines through the muck of others' disbelief. The day stays foggy. She is not an idea, and I didn't put her there. She's not there to jump. She's there to say she did not jump. And I have one more, slightly longer. And it's called I Name the 8 Muscles of My Tongue, and it's got 8 sections that I made up. Agnost. I was slow to understand the phrase, I speak for myself, how to believe what I want to say. Half of my tongue a late bloomer. The tongue has 8 muscles which move it, 4 for shape, 4 for direction. Diatom. Before I am 5, I have the sounds of 2 alphabets in my mouth, but after I am 5, speaking is exertion. I choose English. My aunt pinching my cheek sits sullen in the back of my mouth. My grandmother's loving questions lodge between my canine and molar, a throb. Salt cells. My mother utters lines she believes she needs to, words formed in her lungs at birth. Her life unfurls in sentences, dictation, as told tos. What does she find in translation? Into English and Spanish and German, Italian and Czech. So many tongues. Can she remember herself with just one? Allium. My sister's mouth says more than I do, exhales vivid holler, calls us all to hear. I hear her and forget the taste of my own sorrow. Imagine I'm healed, my suffering surpassed. It was always this way. I don't remember how it happened. My sister's mouth, my answers. Lipid. I might have reminded myself to ask question after question, talked over all the voices who seemed not to listen. If I had known this as a child, I might have ached less for company. I wanted to know things, so I asked. Not everyone felt this way. As cells slough off in the mouth, they leave traces behind to be sopped up or swallowed. I don't change. I will always want to know. Chalk. This muscle tells my secrets, if they're told, cupping truth to keep it close, prevent it from being swallowed. It knows, though sometimes it doesn't know it knows, what the limits are to telling. I want to speak in a room where someone might always be yelling, how fast to let things out, who to talk to, what danger lies underneath. Brine, the place that remembers things the mind might not have learned. Tart shame of thinking too hard about myself. Metallic swig of betrayal. Like my girlhood fears, it lives unnamed. Still, it spills what it knows. Slack. I learn to taste the truth in secret. Give over to mute bliss. What is silent dwells on the names it gives each of itselves, lets them linger to get them right. Thank you very much for listening. And thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Farnaz. It was beautiful. Just an incredible way to end today's conversation. Thank you so much to James and Barbara. Thank you to Katie and everyone at Silverlens for their support in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program, making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. Today's event will be up there shortly. For the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our monthly publication and public events like our daily NSE. You can check the chat for a link to donate to support the Rail. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a poetry reading curated by Jessica Grimm. And you can now all turn your microphones on and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Thank you so much. This was great. Thank you, James.
Thank you,
Wonderful.
Amazing. Thank you,
Thank you,
James.
Brooklyn Rail. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Brooklyn
Bob.
Rail.
Thank you,
Barbara. Great
Barbara. Thank you,
That
James.
was
So
so
much.
Thank you, James.
Thank you for the
Congratulations.
reading.
Thank you,
And go see
Barbara.
the show.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara.
See the show.
Thank
Thank
you.